have a great show today. We have Minnesota gubernatorial candidate Jeff Johnson. He's going to be on. We're going to be talking about his candidacy. He's vying to be the next governor of Minnesota. So we're super excited to have him on. And as you know, it's been a couple weeks since we've had the Tony Hernandez show here live. I've spent the last couple weeks up north. I was up in Great Dent, Minnesota. If anyone's ever been there, it's right near Perham in the Detroit Lakes area. And just had a good time with family. We were celebrating the 4th of July and fishing, doing the boating thing, just spending time with family. It was a good American time, but it truly is great to be back, and we thank all the fans out there who have tuned in consistently to the Tony Hernandez show. Really appreciate that. And speaking of Otter Tail County and Detroit Lakes, Jeff Johnson is actually from that area. So there's nothing like greater northern Minnesota. It sure beats Wisconsin, if you ask me. I mean, there's beautiful parts of Wisconsin, there's no doubt, but there's something truly unique about northern Minnesota. So without further ado, we're going to bring on our next guest, Jeff Johnson. He served on the Minnesota State House of Representatives. Jeff, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to see you. You enjoying summer so far? You've been pretty busy, I guess.
In fact, on Monday we're going up to Detroit Lakes. I know Dent well because I grew up, near there, and we're going up to DL on Monday, and then again next weekend for a fundraiser and then a family reunion.
So do you know Lake Marion and do you know Dent, that area then?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent the first 22 years of my life up that direction. So you're right, it's a beautiful place and it's much better than Wisconsin. I agree.
No doubt about that. So, well, yeah, we thank you for coming on the show. I know you've been busy today, especially probably zooming all over the metro area.
Yeah,
so.
And I just made it, just barely crossed the line here because there was some traffic issues, but I made it, so that's what matters.
And that's the great thing about our show here is we're live, and so the second that hits 4 o'clock, we're broadcasting throughout White Bear Lake and
that's great.
And everything. So it's good to be here. And can you tell us a little more about your campaigns? How do you think it's going so far?
It's going great. I announced about 2 months ago, I guess it was a little over 2 months ago, and I have been trying to travel the state. We try to set aside at least a couple days a week to get outside the Twin Cities, but then also trying to meet as many both Republican activists and just non-Republican voters as we can, spending a little time fundraising because that's obviously an important part of any campaign, as you well know. And the response has been great. It's still early, and the field isn't even necessarily set yet on the Republican side, but I've been meeting and talking with a lot of activists, some of whom are ready to sign on at this point. So it's good.
So what are some of the cities that you've been visiting lately?
Duluth, just a couple days ago. We were up in Aiken last week. We are heading out west to Marshall and that area probably later this week, as well as I mentioned, back up to Detroit Lakes. We have been up to the northwestern part of the state, up Moorhead and that direction as well. And where we have not hit yet is straight south of here, but that should be coming before the end of summer.
And what are you hearing from the folks throughout Minnesota? Is there any messages that are coming out that are clear?
Mostly I've been meeting with Republican activists to talk about the endorsement, and they're ready to start working again. 2012 was a pretty big disappointment to most of us as Republicans on a lot of different levels, and I think it took a few months for people to get over that, but they are, and they're ready to really start looking at the 2014 races and very interested in the governor's race because Minnesotans got to see what happened when Democrats have control of everything in the state, and it wasn't pretty. So people are pretty pumped up, I think, about the 2014 elections.
So I went on your website and just studied a little more about your experience, and so you served in the Minnesota State House of Representatives for, was it 6 years?
Yeah.
And then in the Board of Commissioners, Hennepin County. Can you talk a little more about your experience in the state legislature, and some of your accomplishments there?
Yeah, absolutely. I served I was elected in 2000, and I served 3 terms, and I actually promised my wife when I ran the first time that I would serve for 6 years and no more than that, and that was actually about the right amount of time for me. I happen to think people spend too long in positions, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I represented Plymouth, where I live, as well as points west around the Lake Minnetonka area. And my focus when I was in the legislature was on education issues and civil law issues, and then just taxing and spending. And every year I tried to take a high-profile, conservative, free market idea that was difficult and would really focus on that in the legislature and get it done. And in almost every instance, I was able to turn that idea into law. And that's when we had a DFL Senate. So it wasn't easy. But amongst those things was tort reform or lawsuit reform. It's called joint and several liability reform. It had been a priority of Republicans for about 12 years prior to that, and we just couldn't get it done. And I was given that bill as a freshman, and we got it signed into law by Pawlenty. Eminent domain reform, I carried the bill that fundamentally restricted the ability of government to take our property through eminent domain. And while that was a battle royale with some Democrats and certainly with cities and counties and developers who want to be able to get cheap property, we got that done as well. I did some work on a capital gains tax cut, which we got done, as well as several other things. But those are kind of the three that stand out for me.
I saw one of your accomplishments as well was with methamphetamine.
Yes.
The illegal drug, and I'm interested. Didn't really explain too many of
Yep.
the details of that, but can you talk about that a little more?
Yes, that was a couple of years. I think it was 2004 or 2005, and at that point, meth labs in particular were just a horrible problem, especially in greater Minnesota, central Minnesota, just north of the cities. And I worked with Julie Rosen over in the Senate, and I carried the bill in the House, and we crafted what became the most comprehensive anti-meth bill that had ever been passed in the country. It became a model for a lot of the states on the eastern border, and eventually for the federal government. And the high-profile piece of it was that it put pseudoephedrine products behind the counter, which was very difficult because nobody likes that. Nobody likes to have to sign for it. But what was the beauty of that law was not the piece that was controversial. It were all the other pieces in there. There were a lot of criminal provisions in there. There was a revolving loan fund for cities to deal with the mess that meth labs caused. And within, I don't remember the exact numbers, but within about a year and a half, I believe we saw meth labs decrease by 80 or 85%. I mean, it worked. Now, meth is still a problem, but meth labs aren't anymore. So we largely solved a big problem for greater Minnesota with that bill.
And so running in Hennepin County as well, as a conservative, as a Republican, and working within the constructs of Hennepin County, much must come with its own challenges.
It does, yeah.
And how are you able to work as a conservative, stay true to your principles, and get things done for the people? Yeah,
it is. It's a great challenge. It's kind of a fun challenge, and there are days where you just feel like you're banging your head against a wall. There's 7 of us on the county board, and we each represent districts. I represent the northwestern part of Hennepin County, and there are a lot of 6-to-1 votes where I'm the one voting no on somebody's big idea about how the next way to either spend money or try to influence the way people live their lives, which is a big focus for us. But what I've tried to do is pick my fights, because when you're in a minority of one, you still want to get something done. You don't just constantly want to be voting no and losing. And I've had some success that way with pay for performance provisions in our contracts. We have literally thousands of human service contracts with providers all over the county. And the tradition in Hennepin County had been to pay for service. In other words, we'll pay you $100 for every person that you serve and provide this program to, without looking at all as to whether it was actually changing their lives or accomplishing what we claimed we wanted to accomplish. And I've over time, by relentlessly just pounding on this, I've had some significant success at changing those contracts over to performance contracts that say you get paid at least part of this based upon whether you're actually moving somebody off of welfare into the workforce, and that they stay there over time, or you're actually reintegrating somebody out of prison into society and they don't go back again in 6 months. So that has been a challenge that I have been able to meet, which has been kind of rewarding, I think. But there are days where we just voted on the wheelage tax this last week, and I was on the losing side of that battle. It passed on a 4-3 vote. I actually had 2 people voting with me on that. But part of it is just you got to pick your battles, and I've tried to pick the ones. When I know I'm going to lose, I try to pick those battles where I can educate the public as to how unwisely government is spending their money, so they can pay a little closer attention next time.
Interesting. Changing gears a little bit, something caught my eye on your website, and it's that you're a football coach.
Oh, yeah.
And I come from a long family history of football, played football my whole life.
Okay.
My father's a football coach too. So can you talk a little more about being a coach and why you became involved in that?
You know, it has been...
One sec, Dallas, and
Yeah.
we'll put up the picture there, Dallas. Got a picture of you.
Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, it has been such a rewarding experience to be able to do that. I coached soccer when my kids were really little, and I'm not a big soccer fan. I never played it, but when they're 4 years old, it's not hard to coach something. And then I've coached baseball and football on and off since then. And, you know, I didn't play the game in high school. I did as a younger kid. But it's just been so much fun because, number one, you get to know all of your son's friends better that way. And I have compared it in my on the intro video on our website. I kind of compared coaching football a little bit to being governor, in that you're trying to take a bunch of people who don't agree on things, and in some cases don't really even like each other, which certainly is the legislature, and you try to move them, you try to set a goal and then lead them towards a common vision of winning for football, and try to get people to work together as a team. And I think that applies at least a little bit to being governor of Minnesota, or a different executive leadership position. And I just brought our younger son Rolf to pick up his equipment for this football season, and it was kind of hard because this is the first season in 7 years that I won't be coaching football, and that's kind of sad. It's hard to watch games and not actually be part of it, but it's, you know, I'm trading that for this particular extracurricular activity in the next year.
Yeah, and if you can see, we have the Johnson family here. So it's 2 sons. Rolf is one.
Yeah, and Thor's our older son. He's 15, and Rolf is 12. And I actually, before I came here, Rolf just won the championship in their little league baseball league. So we've and Thor's going to be playing tomorrow. So we've had a good weekend.
So let's talk about the governorship. Let's talk about why you believe that you're the best candidate, A, to win the Republican endorsement and primary, and then B, why you believe that you're the best person to be Minnesota's next governor.
Setting myself apart from the other Republicans, there are 4 of us in the race right now. There may be 5 or 6 in the end. And all of us are friends, and I really think highly of the other people in this race, and any one of them would make a good governor, but I do believe that I'm the strongest candidate, or I wouldn't be in the race, and I kind of set forth 2 reasons for that. Number one, I think I'm the strongest candidate against Mark Dayton. I think I'm the most likely to actually win when you're looking at this from the Republican perspective. And number 2, I think once elected, I have a record to show that I could actually go in there and go on offense and change the direction we're headed, rather than just maybe make an argument or try really hard and not get there, but could actually get it done with what we know will be at least a DFL Senate. Winning, why I think I'm the strongest candidate against Dayton, a couple reasons. Number one, I don't think that we as Republicans are going to be able to win a statewide race in 2014 unless we have a candidate who is both a principled conservative and can really secure and energize the conservative base, but also has broad enough appeal outside that group to non-Republicans to actually win statewide. We just don't have the numbers in Minnesota to lose any Republicans. And we certainly don't have the numbers to win unless we add about half the independents and a handful of Democrats in there. And I don't claim to be the only Republican who fits that endorsable, electable model, but I think I fit it better than anyone else in the race. And if you combine that with my pretty strong electoral base in Hennepin County, because we're not going to do well if we don't do a little bit better in Minneapolis from here on out as Republicans. And also just, I think, an ability to relate to the average middle class, hardworking Minnesotan. I think I'm the strongest candidate against Dayton. And then the second step of that is who will we elect that will actually change the direction we're headed? Because I happen to believe that we can't continue to grow the size and scope and power of government just at a slower pace than the Democrats. which tends to be what we do as Republicans. We just kind of slow things down, but we're always moving in that same direction. And I think if you look at the records of all of us in the race, we talked about mine a little bit, but you can see that I have figured out a way to take a conservative idea or a free market idea and actually turn it into law even when Democrats have a share of power, which they will if we have a Republican governor. And I'm concerned that if we were to win and act as goalies again, just kind of trying to stop the bad stuff but not turn anything around, we'll be able to stop the bad stuff for 4 years, and then the Democrats might take over again and just start again from where we left off and just keep moving in that more liberal, bigger government direction.
Mm-hmm. And from a philosophical basis, I think I asked a bunch of people if they had any questions for you. One of them that came up quite a few times from people, they want to know what is the role of the Minnesota state government, and then also what is that relationship to the federal government as it pertains to many of the policies that are coming through?
Well, the role of the state government, that's a broad question, but the obvious place to start is with the Constitution. And I see the Constitution as the job description for the job I'm seeking as governor. And so that's where you start. Now, there is certainly interpretation as to exactly what it might mean, but I'm a believer in smaller government that focuses on what the Constitution, the state Constitution, tells us we're supposed to do. The relationship to the federal government, unless there are constitutional provisions that allow the federal government to tell us what we have to do, I've been there as a state legislator for 6 years, seeing how many mandates come down from the federal government that they don't necessarily have the power to place upon us. As governor, if the federal government is instructing us to do something, or more often than not saying, we'll give you money, but only if you do it the way we say, I think sometimes we have to take a harder look at whether the money is worth taking. So that could apply to health care, that could apply to education policy, that could apply to transportation policy. But I think many times we just automatically say, hey, if there's money attached from the federal government, we're going to take it and we're going to do what they tell us to do. That's not always the best thing for the people of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. And what are your feelings on the health care law? It sounds like the exchange is going in full speed ahead. Mm-hmm. Is it here to stay in Minnesota? Is there anything that we're going to be able to do to push back against it?
I hope it's not here to stay, because it's horrible policy, and it's a terrible step for Minnesotans. And some people have said, well, Republicans used to support some sort of exchange. And the Republican philosophy of allowing people choices and giving them information about what different options are out there for them, that is a good conservative philosophy. But this is not a market-based exchange at all. It's the federal government saying, here are the rules that we're going to put on every single insurer that might be in this exchange, and then we have a board of unelected people getting to decide what policies even go in there. So it's so far from market-based that it's a disaster. It's going to be extremely expensive. It is going into effect. It will be fully into effect if I'm elected governor, and we will still have a DFL Senate. So getting rid of it the first 2 years, I think, is a fantasy. It's probably not going to happen. Then I think the governor, me or someone else, has to make a decision. Do you try to limit the damage and make it at least a little more market-based, or do you say, let this thing fail and hope that in 2 years you have a Republican legislature, or at least a different Senate, to see if you can repeal it? Because people then, the people of Minnesota hopefully will have been able to see how bad it really is. And I would tell you, I would lean towards the latter, even though I haven't really made the decision yet as to which direction to go there.
Mm-hmm. A lot of families and people in Minnesota right now are concerned about the economic future. They're concerned about jobs right here in our state, especially when some of our neighbors seem to be having an improving economy while we're still in this stagnant stage. What can the state government and what can you do as governor to create jobs, to foster business growth, economic growth, so that families are prospering here?
It is not rocket science, as you know. The more government taxes and controls, the worse it is for creation of jobs. And we actually saw, even though the unemployment rate in Minnesota is actually better than much of the rest of the nation. We saw a report from the Kauffman Foundation just this year, a month or two ago, and this is not a conservative group, this is just a business group. And every year the Kauffman Foundation puts out a 50-state report ranking the states for the number of new businesses that were created per capita in that state. And in 2011, Minnesota ranked last. We created fewer new businesses per capita than any state in the country, and that was before the debacle of this session, which will make it even less likely that we'll start new businesses. That is a really scary sign for the future as to what things will look like 5 or 10 years down the road. So we're not on the right track, and there are a lot of things that a governor should be pushing to make it more likely that entrepreneurs will be either staying here to start jobs, or maybe we can even steal a few from South Dakota and Wisconsin ourselves. That's the tax rate, comprehensive tax reform. It's regulation. The burdens that we place on employers from a regulatory standpoint is it's pretty stark as compared to our neighboring states. It's our workers' comp laws as compared to the states that neighbor us. It's more lawsuit reform. I believe Minnesota eventually should be a right-to-work state, which would make a big difference to people. That's a pretty big political haul, especially when you still have a DFL Senate, but we ought to be talking about it and trying to move forward. So I think you got to look at it comprehensively. It's not just one thing. It's not just, well, let's lower the corporate tax, even though that would be a good part of a bigger picture. But there are many things we need to do, and that's going to take some leadership that's quite different than what we're seeing out of the Capitol right now.
Mm-hmm. And the prevailing attitude out there, Jake and I talk about this a lot. If you talk to people in Minnesota, they're becoming more and more tired of the Democratic agenda here in Minnesota. Democrats came in and said they were going to tax the rich and have all these programs for the poor, and it turns out a lot of these new taxes are actually hitting the working class and poor people the hardest. And so eyes are being opened. But at the same time, we have to admit that the Republican Party doesn't necessarily have the branding right now that people are seeking for an alternative to the failed Democratic economic agenda. Can you address the Republican brand? And can you also address how your policies will improve the lives of working class people, the poor, in all of Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, we have a terrible brand problem as Republicans, both nationally and in Minnesota. And part of the reason is there's this perception, fair or not, that Republicans only care about cutting taxes for rich people and making government smaller. And a lot of people in their minds don't believe that's going to help them or their family in any way. And first of all, I think they're wrong, because it will, but I think we have to talk about it differently. And that's what I've been trying to do on the campaign trail. We live in a high-tax state in Minnesota, and I doubt if we'll ever live in a truly low-tax state. It's just probably not in the cards. But what we ought to be talking about is funding programs that actually do what we say we want them to do. I mean, once we decide that government should be doing a certain thing, if we believe that government should be trying to help the less fortunate get back on their feet, then we ought to be demanding that the programs we fund actually do that they're actually serving the people we claim we want them to serve. And we can measure those things. We just choose not to. And this particular legislature and governor this last year, they didn't spend 1 minute during that session talking about how let's see if we can make programs more effective. Let's use the money that we have from the hardworking taxpayers more effectively. Instead, all they talked about was which taxes from the tax smorgasbord should we pile onto the plate next? Which, here are 20 of them, and let's pick 4 or 5 or 6, the least unpopular, and that's what they ended up doing, and raising both taxes and spending by over $2 billion, not by doing anything differently, but by continuing just to pump money into the same things that we've been doing for years that don't work. And I think your average Minnesota voter who doesn't say they're a Republican or that they're a Democrat, that really resonates with them. I hear this all the time. I'm willing to pay taxes in this state, but I wish government would actually spend it in a wise way. And I think that we should be carrying that message of government doesn't need more of your money. It needs to spend the money it already has much more wisely.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And if you look at that recent story that came out about the SWIFT program that was coming in to overhaul the state finances and the way that the accounting was done, and I believe it was a ticket of $70 million in a couple-year project, and so they're trying to get the SWIFT program operating, and it has all these glitches at every corner, and just yet another example of it. The spending isn't going to increase the quality.
Right. It doesn't. We're spending money on so many things that don't make people's lives any better, but they make us as legislators or as a governor feel good so that we can say, hey, we're trying to address these problems, but we don't seem to care whether it's actually addressing the problem or not. That's frustrating for people.
And so can you tell everybody who's watching out there how they can find out more information about your campaign, how they can volunteer, and your website and everything?
The website is johnsonforgovernor.org, www.johnsonforgovernor.org. You can sign up there just to be on the newsletter. You can sign up to help. You can sign up to contribute, and we'll get back to you. There's a great video on there that I really encourage people to watch that is different from everybody else's opening video. It's interactive, and you get to learn a little bit more about both policy and about me personally. So take a look.
Sounds good. Well, Jeff Johnson, thank you for
thanks,
coming on the
Tony.
show, and
Great
I hope
to
we
be
can
here.
have you on again.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
So that was Jeff Johnson. We appreciate him coming on the show, explain a little more about who he is, what he stands for, why he's running for the Minnesota governor, and we look forward to following his campaign and seeing as it progresses and all the exciting things that are going to happen this next year, because there's one thing that's true, is that more and more people, not only here in Minnesota, but across the entire country, are starting to see that our government is just getting so big that it's beginning to trample more and more on our rights, on our economic freedom, on our opportunities that we have out there, jobs, education, the whole deal. Most people out there believe that we need change. Now, we may disagree about how that change is going to come, but it'll have to happen some way. So thank you, Jeff Johnson, for coming on the show. We are going to talk about what happened these last couple weeks with the emergence of the verdict in the Trayvon Martin case. Now, this is a very sensitive issue. You just have to go on Facebook or Twitter to see that everybody has a different opinion about what this case is all about the decisions that the jury made, the evidence. And I just want to be clear that first and foremost, I agree with what President Obama said. We have a system here in the United States, a judicial system that's based on reasonable doubt, and we also have juries that are made up of our peers to determine the guilt and innocence of people that are being tried or prosecuted. And lawyers and President Obama and other people, they all say that this was a fair trial, that the jury made its decision, and that we have to live with that decision as it is. But I'm going to play a video here that we have, that Dallas actually found for us. And so we're going to try to pull this up. This was a case in New York. And there's some people that are saying that this particular case is similar to the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman case. And we're going to try to play this right now if we can. Let's see if I can get this thing up.
Not guilty, the verdict in the manslaughter trial of Roderick Scott. After more than 19 hours of deliberations over 2 days, a jury acquitted Scott in the manslaughter trial for the shooting death of Christopher Servini last April. YNN reporter Mike Dean joins us now in studio with reaction to the verdict. Mike?
Well, it was quite emotional, Amy. When the not guilty verdict was read, family and friends of the defendant, Roderick Scott, erupted with joy, but the family of the 17-year-old victim, Christopher Servini, showed signs of distress and devastation. Scott breathed a huge sigh of relief as he left the courtroom.
I just want to say thank you for people who believed in me, who stood by me. I still have my regrets for the Servini family. I mean, it's still an unfortunate situation for them. I am happy that at least this chapter of it's over.
As deliberations dragged on over 2 days and the jury asked for testimony to be read back, Scott admits he didn't know how this would turn out.
I was nervous, of course. I mean, yeah, you never know which direction this whole thing is going to turn, so I have no idea. But it worked out what I feel. I feel that justice was served today.
Servini's family members say justice wasn't served. They say Christopher was murdered in cold blood and that he had never been in trouble, and Scott acted as judge, jury, and executioner.
And the message is that we can all go out and get guns and shoot anybody that we feel that is threatening us, and lie about the fact my son never threatened anybody. He was a gentle child. His nature was gentle. He was a good person, and he was never, ever arrested for anything and has never been in trouble. He was 16 years and 4 months old, and he was slaughtered.
Scott says he acted in self-defense when he confronted Cervini and 2 others, saying they were stealing from neighbors' cars. He told them he had a gun and ordered them to freeze and wait for police. Scott says he shot Cervini twice when the victim charged toward him, yelling that he was going to get Scott.
How could this happen to a beautiful, sweet child like that? All he wanted to do was go home. And then for them to say that he was saying, please don't kill me, I'm just a kid. And he just kept on shooting him.
Scott says the last 7 months have been difficult for him and his family. If he could go back to the events in the early morning hours of April 4th, there are things he says he would do differently.
If it meant a person not losing their life, absolutely. Would I have still tried to stop what was going on? That I would have done. But if I knew ahead of time that I could do something to prevent someone losing their life, I didn't want anyone to lose their life. So,
as he left the Hall of Justice, Scott said the first thing he was going to do when he got home was get a good night's sleep. When asked if he'll continue living in his current home, which is just 1 street away from the Cervinis, he said, for the time being.
And certainly, as you said in the beginning, Mike, an emotional case, both sides.
Exactly, both sides, and nobody knew what was going to happen in this one. And as
Okay, so that's a case that happened in the state of New York, and with that, I'm going to bring on our 2 panelists here, Sam Wayne Pierce from New York State, and Jake, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tony.
Yeah, it's been a couple weeks since we've had the show, as the live viewers could tell by the technical difficulties at the beginning.
Yeah.
But, you know, such is life. Sam, how are you? How's everything in New York?
Things are good, Tony. Hello, Minnesota.
Hello, Minnesota. So I thought that was a pretty interesting case. I'm not quite sure exactly when it happened. It looked pretty recent in New York. I would say the circumstances were almost all the same as the circumstances that took place in Florida. I think there are a couple key differences there that I definitely do want to hit on. But you know, I just wanted to get your reaction. First of all, you, Sam, from that particular case in New York.
Tony, I think there's a really big difference in that Roderick Scott awoke to these teenagers trying to get into his car. And I think that's a big difference between what those kids were doing and versus what Trayvon Martin was doing when George Zimmerman began to follow Martin. So I would just at least caution you to get that out there to the viewers that these teenagers were attempting to burglarize Mr. Scott's car.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a valid point that you're making there, because with the Trayvon Martin case, there was nothing that was shown that Trayvon was doing wrong in that particular neighborhood, and Zimmerman ID'd Trayvon when he saw him and deemed him as somebody suspicious for whatever reasons that might be. And therefore he began to pursue him. Whereas the difference in this case, as you pointed out, Sam, that at least allegedly these 3 people were caught in the act of a crime. And did they say, was it actually his car that he was protecting there?
I believe from the research I was able to do following along with the case, burglarizing his vehicle, he awoke on his couch around 3 in the morning to a lot of commotion outside. And there are 3 teenage boys trying to get into his car. If I'm mistaken and it wasn't his car, they were burglarizing or attempting to a car in the neighborhood. So still, I think that would be a big difference in that case as opposed to the Trayvon Martin case, where Trayvon was apprehended essentially, but not while committing a crime per se towards Mr. Zimmerman or Mr. Zimmerman's property.
Mm-hmm. And Jake, what do you think?
You know, these are really ugly cases, these self-defense cases. I see a lot of similarities between these 2, Trayvon Martin in this case. I definitely think Sam's making some real good points about the criminal act that was being committed, but you know, you hear the motions of the parents in this case, and then Trayvon Martin's case, and it's a teenage boy. I don't even think Trayvon had a criminal record, and this kid didn't have a criminal record. It just seems like, why did life have to go? But at the same point, the rule of law is on self-defense is if this person feels like they're threatened with loss of life or limb, and you know, that's very difficult. Everyone's different on that one, and I don't know this gentleman. This is the first time I've seen this video, but when I look at Zimmerman, I kind of think of the guy as a person that probably needs a gun to resort to defending his life, and he didn't know how far Trayvon was going to take it. And I think that same thing with a lot of women that also would be in a situation like that, where there could be a lot of bodily harm done with a full-grown male.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to play a clip from President Obama. He addressed the country on Friday through a press conference. I don't think it was planned. He went to the press conference and showed up there, and he gave about a 15 to 17 minute address. And you know, for me, when I watched President Obama talk to the nation on this, it actually, for the first time since his 2008 presidential campaign, it was the first time, at least in my opinion, that I saw our president speak from the heart. He didn't have a teleprompter. I think he wasn't reading any script or anything, and he was speaking from his own personal experience and also from the experience that he's gathered being the president of this country. And so we're going to play some of the clip here, and then we'll discuss it in a little bit. So try to open this up if we can.
First of all, to tell you that Jay is prepared for all your questions and is very much looking forward to the session. Second thing is, I want to let you know that over the next couple of weeks, there are going to obviously be a whole range of issues, immigration, economics, et cetera. We'll try to arrange a fuller press conference to address your questions. The reason I actually wanted to come out today is not to take questions, but to speak to an issue that obviously has gotten a lot of attention over the course of the last week, the issue of the Trayvon Martin ruling. I gave a preliminary statement right after the ruling on Sunday, but watching the debate over the course of the last week, I thought it might be useful for me to expand on my thoughts a little bit. First of all, I want to make sure that once again I send my thoughts and prayers, as well as Michelle's, to the family of Trayvon Martin, and to remark on the incredible grace and dignity with which they've dealt with the entire situation. I can only imagine what they're going through, and it's remarkable how they've handled it. The second thing I want to say is to reiterate what I said on Sunday, which is there are going to be a lot of arguments about the legal issues in the case. I'll let all the legal analysts and talking heads address those issues. The judge conducted the trial in a professional manner. The prosecution and the defense made their arguments. The juries were properly instructed that in a case such as this, reasonable doubt was relevant, and they rendered a verdict.
Okay, so just to reiterate that first point here, it's one thing that I think is very important, is that President Obama is conceding that the justice system worked in this case. And if we look at that similar case, although there are differences of the case in New York, they basically essentially rendered the same verdict. And so you could make the argument that the law is being applied equally here in terms of, you know, whether or not justice is being served is a different question. But that being said, he goes on later, and many other people are calling for change in the law, that perhaps we need to change the law so that we don't have armed vigilantes out there pursuing people who they believe may be suspicious or may be committing crimes. And I just want to be clear that I believe there's a stark difference between defending your home, defending your life, or defending the lives of your loved ones and lives of others that are surrounding you from an immediate threat. I believe what is at question here is whether or not we want to have armed individuals or armed vigilantes that are operating with no jurisdiction, with no authority under any type of law, whether it's local, state, or federal laws. Do we want people, or do we want it to be legal for these unarmed, untrained vigilantes to actively go out and chase and pursue people they deem suspicious? And then when they do that, isn't that setting up a series of conflicts in decision-making processes that could lead to fatal consequences, that could lead to death or serious injury? And I believe that that's one of the main issues that are at play here. And I posted it on my Facebook account that I believe that the left and the right, they both have it wrong here. I really don't think that, although race maybe was an issue, we'll never know that because we can't be in somebody else's skin or somebody else's mindset. But I don't think you can say that purely race is the issue like many on the left are proclaiming. Similarly, I don't believe that you can say that this is purely a case of self-defense because George Zimmerman was on public property actively chasing Trayvon Martin throughout the neighborhood, like I said, with no legal authority or jurisdiction to do so. And so really, to me, that's the core point of this whole issue. And I believe that we should have a debate about it. I believe that we should have a spirited debate. And I also believe that we need to do it out of the respect for the difference of perspectives that are out there from different Americans. Because if you're an African American male, you're going to look at this a lot differently than if you're a white American, or if you're an Asian American, or a Hispanic American, or if you're Jewish, or you can go on and on. And so, Jake, what do you think? Am I off base here?
I think you're off base on this one. You bring up this case and you talk about these individuals patrolling their neighborhoods as a crime watch, and you allude to the fact that every once in a while, in probably very rare cases, it ends up in a tragedy like this. But how many times have these things had successes and saved lives or property because of these programs being instituted?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know either, but I don't want to jump to conclusions and say it doesn't. In fact, I would venture to guess that it's going to be more on the side of success than it is on the side of failure. The other thing that I want to bring up here, and I like using sports analogies for a lot of things, and it seems to me a lot of people in this case, and I stayed out of it for the most part, but they want to make Zimmerman off to be a bad guy, and of course they allude to race, which is complete.
And there's the flip side. You hear the people who are claiming that he's a hero and that he was acting in a purely innocent manner too. You hear it on both sides.
Yeah, I don't really know how you could really say he's a hero other than maybe by nature trying to protect his community is a heroic activity. But the way I look at it is like a football game. I mean, everyone wants to make this guy out to be a bad person. It's just like if a linebacker comes after a quarterback throws a ball and he leads with his helmet, it's an obvious penalty. This person should be fined and penalized 15 yards for committing such a terrible act against a quarterback. There's also cases where, a receiver's run down the field and a safety is coming at the same point, and then next thing you know, it's a helmet to helmet, totally unintentional. There's no bad party in that. And that's really what it seems like in a lot of these self-defense cases. It's just two bad circumstances that come together, and tragically, someone gets hurt. In the football scenario, a guy could be injured and his career could end. In this case, in these self-defense cases, his life is ended. But I don't want to hunt for that linebacker that's trying to commit a penalty. I think we should stay out of it and look at the case to be, and I think that's what they did.
I want to be clear that I believe there's a difference between neighborhood watchdog groups, which I believe are a good thing.
Yeah.
People that are actively observing the neighborhoods for crime, for suspicious people, and contacting the cops and letting them deal with it, versus What I think the difference here is vigilantism, having people who are untrained, but they're armed, going out in these neighborhoods, actively chasing individuals that they deem suspicious.
Well, I don't know what you mean by untrained. I'm sure he was trained with a firearm at some point.
He's not trained under the law. He wasn't
What does
authorized
that matter?
under the law.
Why do you have to be trained under the law?
Because here's one reason why. When you're stopped by a police officer, that police officer has to respect our civil rights. They can't stop you without probable cause.
But they don't always do it.
They're trained to, but they
You
can at
see what
least
I'm
be
saying?
held accountable for it. And
Sure,
so
but
they can't stop you with.
Zimmerman. I mean, I don't see where your argument
Well,
is.
no,
here.
nobody was holding him accountable.
Well, he actually had to go to trial, so he could have been held accountable for it. But I think the facts came out in this case, and certainly they found no racism, which is just complete, utter, terrible what
Well, you
Bob
can't
was doing.
prove it. You can't prove it.
Well, I think you look at the case of Zimmerman. I'm just following the facts here. I mean, his date to the prom back in high school was an African American lady. He's actually helped with, I think, a Big Brother program with African American children. He himself is Hispanic. He's half Hispanic, half white. I mean, the facts don't add up.
My point is you can't prove it either way. But
the only thing you could probably prove is the guy at Trayvon that night wearing a hoodie might have looked suspicious. Well, I mean, that's just natural. People would feel that way if he's walking around a neighborhood that's had a lot of crime. And that's just a sad reality of what happened here. I mean, I don't want to try to paint one person as bad. Sometimes there are just circumstances in life, like car accidents, where there are two people that were doing the good thing, but for some reason those two cars collided and life died.
Sam, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, a couple important points, Tony. Zimmerman was told to not to follow Trayvon Martin.
That's right, he was.
by the 911 dispatcher.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true though.
It is. It's on record.
No, that's true.
Yeah, but if you take what he said though on the phone, they asked him where is the guy or where's the suspect, and so someone could construe that as to, okay, well, let me go find out where he's at.
Tony, we'll have to do a.
I listened to the full 911 tape that Zimmerman made, and the dispatcher clearly tells him not to pursue Trayvon, and he says. He even asked him, "Are you chasing him right now?" And Zimmerman's huffing and puffing, and he says no, and the guy says, "Don't chase him." And so that's just the fact of the matter is he was pursuing Trayvon. Now, if you put yourself in Trayvon's shoes, okay, like I said, when you're dealing with the police, you know that you're dealing with the police, and there's a certain understanding that you have. The police are armed. The police have to operate under certain codes of conduct. And also, as a citizen, you don't threaten a police officer because if you do, you could get shot. We all know that that is true, and it happens.
Right.
Whereas, if you put yourself in Trayvon's position, there's a very good chance that what he believed is that Zimmerman was just an individual who was out to get him.
Right.
And so Trayvon's first reaction when he realized that Zimmerman was looking at him when he was on the phone was he took off running. At that point, Zimmerman should have just let him go and stayed on the phone with the police and not followed him.
Which I would agree with.
And
I think
so
most
by
people would.
following
Right.
him and ultimately...
Which isn't illegal. Which isn't illegal.
No,
though.
but he ultimately found him and cornered him. And again, put yourself in Trayvon's shoes. The guy who he thinks is chasing him and out to get him now has him cornered. So what does Trayvon do? He's a tough kid. You know, he's probably a good fighter. He starts fighting with his fists.
Right.
And he ends up getting on top of Zimmerman, and he's beating him up.
Right.
And you know as well as I do, you know, the man-to-man, you know, if you're in a fist fight, if you're pursuing somebody and you're getting your butt kicked, that's life because he engaged it.
Right.
And so for Zimmerman to think, oh, now I'm getting my butt kicked, now I can shoot this kid, I think is, you know, the problem of chasing him led to that feeling where, again, Zimmerman
right, but given
being
that case,
armed,
though, given that case, what you just said, I thought you were
untrained.
making my point, actually. It's just bad circumstance that they came together at that point, and now Trayvon Martin's on top beating him, and at that point, is there a reasonable belief by Zimmerman, and the way this prosecution has to work is that they have to prove against that that he doesn't believe life or limb is being threatened by that.
Yeah.
And I think they made a valid case.
And
that
again,
it was.
that's why I'm not disputing
Right.
the verdict of the jury.
Okay.
What I'm disputing is the laws and the presence of vigilantes that are taking the laws into their own hands and acting like police officers, even though they don't have authority under the law. And I do believe this is a civil rights issue in a way, because we all have the right and the freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. And somebody can say, well, that only means against police officers. Well, does it? If somebody's acting like a police officer and they're armed and they're going to corner you, say you're walking in a neighborhood that's not your own, and some vigilantes find you because they don't like you for whatever reason,
Right.
and maybe there's a history of crime in their neighborhood, and they stop you at gunpoint, do you have to subdue and give up to them? Like, isn't that a dangerous philosophy if we're going to be operating under that? We're just going to allow these neighborhoods to have their own cops and cowboys.
See, I think you're taking one case and you're making it sound like all these are bad. And in the same point, I mean, if someone's walking, say I owned a 4-acre lot of land and someone was snooping around my land at night, and I thought they were a suspicious person because I didn't recognize them, and it's dark
But
out.
that's different, though. We're
How's that
talking
different,
because
though?
it's
But this
private.
is his
This is
neighborhood.
private property.
Well, yeah, but he was in the
once you're
neighborhood,
not-
so
once- and this is what I believe. And again, I don't know if this is a legal theory applied to this case or not, but what I believe is we all have an inherent right to defend ourselves and our lives and our homes.
Yep.
But once you're outside of your home and your own property and you're going out there chasing and pursuing individuals and you're not an officer of the law, I believe that you are basically playing with fire there. And
Well,
you're setting
sure you are
off you're
playing
setting
with fire.
off a
Yeah.
series of events that can lead to tragedy, which in this case I believe it was, because ultimately, you know, going back to the New York case, ultimately there was no evidence that Trayvon was doing anything wrong. He should have been in that neighborhood. He was staying at a home
Right.
a half a mile away.
Right.
He wasn't committing any crimes. The last known activity that he went to 7-Eleven to buy Skittles and a watermelon drink.
Right.
So from Trayvon's perspective, again, going into his skin, he's not doing anything wrong, and all of a sudden he's being chased by somebody who he thought was scary.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
I mean,
and
I
so
definitely
that's
see
where
that.
I think that
Sure.
there's problems with being a vigilante. And I don't know, Sam, what do you think?
First, in the break, I did a quick Tony Hernandez show fact check on this New York case. I want to make a big clarification to your viewers and even to you and Jake maybe. So the New York case, the Roderick Scott case, he did find the 3 teenagers in his driveway, his personal property, at 3 a.m. His lawyer brilliantly pointed out that one of the 3, not the one that was shot dead, Tony, but one of the 3 had a bad criminal record for burglarizing. So the other 2, one of which sadly gets shot, the defense attorney speculates they're rushing to get their cousin, it was a cousin relationship, off the scene because he's been off and on probation a couple times, so they're worried about that for the crime that they're in the act of essentially committing. They want to get him out of there. They rush it. Roderick Scott, in that commotion, shoots. And it's his personal property. So we started the show off, I think, to a certain extent by drawing a lot of comparisons between that and Trayvon Martin. I just want to say I think that the more I read about the New York case, that's really, really apples to oranges.
Mm-hmm.
As you pointed out, Trayvon Martin's just innocently walking home. He's not on Zimmerman's personal property. The dispatcher said, don't follow him. Just let us take it from here. I think in this case, Tony, I agree with you. I think we've got a real problem if we're innocently walking the streets at night and we're going to be profiled for whatever reason by anyone who does. What if, Tony, you grew up Hispanic American. What if somebody just decides they don't like the way you look or dress or act and you're walking down the street? That's dangerous.
I don't see the apples and oranges comparison there because, I mean, I think you're just really focusing on the fact the crime was taking place, but the crime that was taking place doesn't justify a death. I'm just saying it's circumstantial. I mean, we always want to try to find a bad person in these cases, but not every car accident has a bad person. Sometimes it's just the way things work out. And even in this case, you know, I hate to think about, you know, our childhood growing up, and I remember back where I grew up in La Crosse, there was this thing, you steal chromies off cars. You remember that? The little things that go over the tubes.
hoodies.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, back when I was a stupid kid doing something like that, I could have been in an encounter like that, and it doesn't justify taking away my life. You know, I feel I've grown into a fairly good citizen here in the United States. So it's just sometimes it's sad stuff, and I don't really think it matters if there was a crime being committed or not. It's just really let's focus on the issue, the legal issue here is, does someone really think that their life or limb is, you know, possibly being threatened at that point? I don't think we disagree on it. So really the question then that Tony proposed is, do you think these vigilantes, these neighborhood watch groups are a justified thing? And I mean, sure, we could have that debate, but quite frankly, if I was in a high crime area, I would appreciate people that do that kind of stuff.
Well, that's given that they have the best of intentions. I think if anything, you increase the amount of police officers who are on the ground. But to your point,
Costs more money, though.
To your point, though, about, you know, the self-defense, yeah, the jury decided that that's fine. I still think, though, like as a man, you know, if you and I are fighting, and all of a sudden you start pummeling me and beating the crap out of me, I can't pull out a gun and shoot you, because that just breaks my code of honor personally. Whether you think you're gonna get killed or not is a matter of debate, and it again brings forth the reason why we only want trained law enforcement officers pursuing and chasing after suspects or even anybody, because in our country, in our streets, we all know that the challenges police officers face. There's drug addicts, there's alcoholics, there are people with schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, mental health issues, and you really need to be trained in order to deal with a confrontation. Otherwise, what can happen is if you're not trained and you're armed, it sets off, it's like I said, playing with fire. All of a sudden, you know, maybe you think you're getting killed for a split second when you're really just getting punched.
But see, I feel you're overusing.
And then you pull out your gun.
I think you're overusing the term pursuing, because he is in a neighborhood watch. So technically, this is kind of the area that he wants to focus on. It's not like he's going in a vehicle and going to, you know, 10 miles away trying to solve his own crime. I think he has a right to be there, and I think a lot of people in that neighborhood are looking forward to people in their neighborhood carrying out this mission. It just happens that this was a very tragic case, but I don't think this is commonality when it comes to these neighborhood watches.
Yeah, and again, I think probably where we disagree the most is I don't think that he has a right to actively pursue another person, because you're violating their liberty. By having somebody else come after you and detaining you or trying to arrest you or trying to corner you, that's not a police officer.
Well, he did call the
doesn't matter, though.
And
as Sam pointed out, the officials told him to back off.
And I believe he was
wait till the police come.
But I believe he was backing off to his vehicle, and that's where Trayvon intercepted him.
You wait for the police to come so that the trained professionals can deal with it. And Zimmerman clearly, and this is even more obvious, is not a trained professional, because he thought somebody was suspicious for just being in that neighborhood when he had every right to be, and he pursued him. And he got pummeled by Trayvon, and then he ended up shooting him. And I don't think that those were a professional series of events, and that's why I believe that at the very minimum there should be laws against vigilantes chasing after somebody that's not on your private property. Because once you're pursuing somebody, that puts you into a whole different level of pursuit, and it opens up the door to a whole different series of events that can be fatal and disastrous. And
lively discussion.
That's our time here, the Tony Hernandez Show. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We'll be here again next Saturday. May God bless you. May God bless America. And vaya con Dios.